Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that is quiet, almost painfully ordinary, but somehow endlessly fascinating. Settle and dim the lights, grab a blanket, and let your eyes drift, because tonight we are not chasing battles or revolutions. We are tracing the slow, unchanging life of a man named Mr. McAllister, a 19th-century Scottish lighthouse lens polisher. Now you might think lighthouse work is heroic or dramatic, but for Mr. McAllister, it was mostly about repetition and cold stone. Every morning before the sun had even thought about rising, he would pull on his woolen jumper and climb the 87 steps that spiraled up like a snail shell from the rocky cliffs to the lamp room above. The wind would slap his face with mist, and the gulls would wheel overhead, squawking in that way that made him curse under his breath, not at them, of course, but at the endless repetition of their cries. At the top, the great lens waited like a patient sphinx, 72 glass panels that caught the rising sun and threw it back to see in a perfect beam that could be seen for miles. Each panel had to be polished every day by hand with the same red cloth that smelled faintly of polish and salt. Mr. McAllister counted as he worked 1, 2, 3 up to 4,000, each number spoken softly under his breath like a mantra. Sometimes he would pause at 400 and look out the window at the endless gray horizon and imagine a ship somewhere out there bouncing over waves and wondering if they noticed his work or the cold and wet that he endured just so the lamp shone bright enough to keep them safe. Most likely they did not, but he liked imagining they did because it made him feel less like a man polishing glass for ghosts. The lighthouse itself was built in the early 1800s, tall and stout and unyielding to the storm. Its walls were damp with moss, and its floors slick with salt from the crashing waves. Mr. McAllister had been working here for 25 years, which meant he had climbed these steps thousands of times and polished these panels tens of thousands. Some days he would trace a pattern in the glass with his finger before wiping it away, knowing that no one would ever see what he had made, but taking comfort in the act anyway. His hands were rough and his nails chipped and his back ached in the early mornings, but he never complained. Complaining seemed pointless in a place that barely knew the sound of voices besides his own. At breakfast, he would eat the same oats with a bit of honey and a chunk of hard bread. Sometimes he imagined a different life in a town where people shouted and dogs ran free and the church bells were loud enough to drown the waves. But the truth was, he could not remember why he had taken this job in the first place. Perhaps it was family tradition, or perhaps it was just a luckless moment that stuck and grew into a lifetime. Mr. McAllister liked to tell visitors that he was the best polisher on the coast, but no one ever came. And perhaps that was best because he was the only witness to his own dedication, and that red cloth was his only audience. His evenings were even quieter. After dinner, he would sit on a narrow ledge outside the lamp room and watch the sea whisper. The waves never really stopped moving, no matter how calm they looked. He could hear the tiny hissing of water over rocks and the faint cry of the gulls settling for the night. Sometimes he would count the waves in the same way he counted glass panels 1, 2, 3 until he forgot what number he had reached. Sleep would come eventually, but it was always broken by the sound of the sea scraping against the cliff or the distant foghorn moaning in the darkness. Mr. McAllister had a small garden outside the lighthouse, a narrow strip of earth where he grew herbs that mostly died from salt spray or neglect. He had tried tomatoes once, and the sea wind had flattened them before they ever ripened. Yet he persisted planting parsley and mint because at least they smelled nice when he brushed past them. This tiny rebellion against monotony gave him some comfort. He could control the herbs unlike the waves that battered the rocks or the clouds that hid the sun. The lighthouse gave him order in an otherwise chaotic world that belonged entirely to the sea. On Sundays, he would polish the lens extra carefully because he liked to imagine a ship passing by and the sailors noticing the glow. He would think of their lives and how small and fleeting they must seem compared to the eternal rhythm of the tides. Sometimes he would whisper to the lens, wishing it could talk back and tell him that he was not wasting his time. Of course, the lens did not answer, but he liked to imagine a sigh of approval slipping through the glass. It was a comfort and a quiet companion for a man who had so little else. One day, the keeper before him had left a journal on the shelf, a leather-bound book with yellowing pages. Mr. McAllister read it during long storms and nights with no moon. It spoke of shipwrecks and distant ports, and men who had drowned while looking for treasure that did not exist. He read it slowly, imagining their voices whispering from the past. Some nights he would mimic their handwriting in a notebook of his own and count the letters as he wrote. Perhaps it was a way to feel connected to the world beyond the cliff. Perhaps it was just another repetition to soothe the days away. The village below occasionally sent a fishing boat up to deliver news or supplies. They spoke briefly, and Mr. McAllister answered politely but never lingered. He preferred the quiet. Conversation was heavy and messy. The sea, however, spoke in simple rhythms and endless repetition. He felt he understood its language, and it had no complaints, and never grew bored. At night, when the fog rolled in and wrapped around the lighthouse like a soft blanket, he would sit by the lamp and let the sound of the waves lull him almost to sleep. The only interruptions were his own footsteps counting steps, and his own voice counting glass panels. It was almost soothing, like a mantra, almost, and yet the sea had moods that no man could predict. One evening the sky turned an uncharacteristic shade of green, and the waves whispered differently, as if sharing a secret Mr. McAllister could not understand. He rubbed each glass panel more carefully than usual, counting every stroke twice. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 4,000, and then again just to be certain. His heart beat slightly faster. It was as if the lighthouse itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unknown. Outside, the waves moved with a strange urgency and the gulls were silent, and then he noticed something. A faint glow on the horizon that was not the sun and not a ship. He blinked, and the glow pulsed like a heartbeat, and then vanished entirely, leaving him wondering if his eyes were deceiving him, or if the sea had just whispered a new story that he was not ready to hear. The next morning, Mr. McAllister woke with a start, even though the sea was calm, and the sun was only just brushing the horizon with pale pink light. He rubbed his eyes and tried to tell himself it was nothing, but he could not shake the memory of that heartbeat glow. Maybe it was a ship far off with some strange lantern, or maybe the sea was playing tricks on him, but he had never felt quite so alert in all his 25 years of lighthouse life. He climbed the steps as usual, counting 1, 2, 3 up to 87, but his mind kept wandering to the horizon and what he might have seen. The wind was colder than usual, and the spray stung his cheeks, but he hardly noticed. He had been climbing these steps so many times that his legs moved on their own while his mind raced. At the lamp room, he picked up the red cloth and began wiping the first glass panel 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 4,000, as always. The repetition usually soothed him like waves lapping at the rocks, but today it could not. Quiet the sense of curiosity that had settled like a stone in his chest. He looked out over the water as he worked, imagining the glow returning and wondering if he should take a small boat out to investigate. Of course, he knew it was impossible. The cliffs were high and the waves unforgiving, and he had spent his life observing the sea from a safe distance. And yet the thought lingered. What if the sea was trying to tell him something he had not been listening to all these years? By mid-morning the sun rose higher and the lighthouse felt warmer, but Mr. McAllister barely noticed. He moved from panel to panel with the same care, counting every stroke. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 4,000 again, and then he repeated the cycle for the sake of certainty. Sometimes he hummed softly as he worked a tune he had picked up from the village children years ago. It did not matter that no one was here to hear it, because the sound of his own voice gave a rhythm to the long hours. He imagined the lens as a giant eye watching the horizon, and thought that perhaps it too had noticed the glow. He smiled at the thought. He liked imagining that the lens could see as he did, even if it did not respond. Afternoons were slow. Mr. McAllister would eat a small meal of bread and cheese, and sometimes a boiled egg if he had the energy to boil water. He would sit in the tiny chair by the lamp and watch as clouds moved lazily across the sky. The sea below shifted in patterns that were familiar yet always new. It whispered endlessly, as if mocking the human tendency to expect anything to change. He sometimes spoke to it softly, saying hello, or asking it how it was feeling that day. The sea did not answer, but the waves lapped in gentle rhythm like a sleepy conversation he could almost understand. He liked the feeling of being heard, even if only by the endless water. That evening the wind began to pick up, and the sky turned a dull gray. Mr. McAllister could hear the distant rumble of waves crashing against rocks far below. He climbed the steps to the lamp room to inspect the glass panels and noticed that a thin layer of salt had begun to form overnight. He wiped it away carefully, counting 1, 2, 3, all the way to 4,000, but his thoughts kept returning to the previous night. The glow had felt like a message meant for him. Perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps it was the start of something that would break the monotony of his life. He felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. It was almost like discovering a hidden door in a house he had lived in for decades. As darkness fell, Mr. McAllister lit the lamp and watched the beam sweep over the restless sea. The lighthouse had always been his anchor in a world that moved too quickly and too unpredictably, but tonight it felt different. The glow had reminded him that there were mysteries beyond the cliffs and the familiar pattern of steps and panels. He wondered if he had been too comfortable in his repetition or if it was simply human nature to cling to what was known. The thought lingered as he settled into his chair and listened to the wind rattling the windows. The gulls had quieted and the waves whispered secrets he could not quite decipher. He closed his eyes for a moment and allowed himself to drift towards sleep, imagining what the horizon might hold. Sleep did not last long. Mr. McAllister woke to a faint scratching at the door. He sat up straight in the dark and listened. The lighthouse was old and noisy, the floorboards creaked and the wind made strange moans through cracks in the stone, but this sound felt different. It was deliberate, soft, and hesitant, like a visitor trying not to wake the sea. He held his breath and listened. The scratching continued and then stopped. He felt a flicker of fear he had not experienced in decades. Normally, he would have ignored anything unusual because there was never anything unusual to speak of. But tonight was different. He rose slowly and crept to the door. The lantern in his hand cast long shadows across the stone walls. He opened the door a fraction and looked out into the fog. The wind had shifted and carried with it the scent of brine and something else, something almost like smoke. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing on the cliff below. It was tall and thin, moving with the rhythm of the waves, but impossible to identify. Mr. McAllister blinked, and it was gone. He closed the door and leaned against it, shaking slightly. Perhaps it had been a trick of the fog or his imagination running wild after years of isolation. And yet he could not stop thinking about the glow from the previous night and now this figure. It was as if the sea was trying to tell him that something he had never noticed before was waiting just beyond the familiar horizon. The hours crawled slowly until dawn broke once more. Mr. McAllister climbed the steps for the 100th time in his life, counting each one carefully. The wind had a new chill to it, and the clouds hung low, threatening rain. He picked up the red cloth and polished the first glass panel, counting 1, 2, 3 up to 4,000. He repeated the pattern as usual, but his mind kept returning to the previous night. What had he seen in the fog? Was it a warning or a welcome, or perhaps nothing at all? He tried to tell himself it was nothing, yet the feeling would not leave. Something was stirring beyond the horizon, and it had noticed him. And just as he reached the final panel, he heard it again. A faint humming coming from the sea itself, a sound that was not waves, not wind, not gulls. It was low and steady, almost like a song or a voice calling him by name. Mr. McAllister froze mid-stroke of the red cloth and stared through the glass panels at the endless water. The lamp room seemed to grow colder as the humming grew louder. He counted 1, 2, 3, but the numbers felt hollow because the sound had no numbers and no pattern. And then the horizon lit up once more with the glow brighter than before, pulsing as if it were breathing. Mr. McAllister felt his heart leap and knew that whatever was out there had been waiting for him to notice all along. Mr. McAllister stood frozen in the lamp room, staring at the horizon. The glow pulsed steadily, as if breathing in and out like a giant living eye watching him. The humming continued faint at first, but slowly grew louder until it filled the room, wrapping around him like a thick fog. He felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. All his years of repetition and quiet had prepared him for many things, but not for a moment like this. He gripped the red cloth tighter in his hands and counted 1, 2, 3 almost involuntarily, though the numbers felt meaningless against the vast rhythm of the sea and the glowing light. He took a step closer to the window, pressing his face against the cold glass. The light did not flicker or fade. It remained steady like a heartbeat. He squinted and tried to discern shape or form, but there was nothing, just the horizon and the endless sea and that pulse of light that seemed alive. Mr. McAllister felt a shiver creep down his spine. For the first time he wondered if the glow had anything to do with him at all, or if it had existed forever and he had only now noticed. He shook his head and laughed softly. A man who had spent 25 years polishing glass panels, counting steps and waves, was not supposed to see things like this. And yet here he was staring at a living pulse on the horizon, and hearing the sea sing in a voice he had never heard before. He took a deep breath and began polishing again, though the motions felt different now. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 4,000, but the counting seemed smaller somehow against the enormity of what he had just witnessed. His hands moved automatically, following the familiar rhythm, but his mind wandered to the glow and the humming and what it could mean. Could it be a ship with lights unlike any other, or a distant storm that carried some strange energy? Or was it the sea itself revealing something hidden for centuries, just waiting for someone patient enough to notice? He smiled faintly, imagining the sea whispering congratulations on a job well done after decades of faithful service. The day passed slowly with the usual rhythm of panel steps and counting, yet nothing felt ordinary. Even the wind seemed different, as if it were carrying a message. He paused at panel 43 and noticed a strange reflection, not of himself, but of something like a shape in the glass. He blinked and it vanished. The lens was spotless as always, and the light outside remained steady, but he could not shake the feeling of being observed. He adjusted the lamp slightly and wiped the panel again, counting 1, 2, 3, but the feeling lingered. It was as if the glow from last night had left a residue in the world that only he could perceive. By evening the fog rolled in heavy and the lighthouse felt smaller and quieter than usual. Mr. McAllister lit the lamp and sat in his chair, letting the beam sweep over the restless water. The humming returned faintly, almost playful this time. He closed his eyes and tried to follow the rhythm, counting silently 1, 2, 3, 4 until he lost track. Sleep was nearly impossible with the sound wrapping around him. Eventually he gave up trying to rest and climbed to the ledge outside the lamp room. The wind cut sharply and the waves crashed against the rocks in a steady chorus. He watched the horizon for hours, waiting for the glow to appear again, and wondered if he had imagined the previous night or if the sea had truly revealed something beyond human comprehension. When the glow finally returned, it was accompanied by a change in the waves. They seemed to rise higher and then fall with precise timing, almost like they were responding to the pulse of light. Mr. McAllister counted each wave quietly, 1, 2, 3, and noticed that they coincided with the glow. Each crest matched a pulse, and the humming deepened into something almost musical. He felt as if he had stumbled onto a secret pattern hidden in the sea itself. For decades he had counted steps and panels and waves to maintain order, but now he felt like he was witnessing a hidden order the sea had never allowed humans to perceive before. He felt small and large at the same time, overwhelmed and exhilarated. The night passed slowly with the glow and waves interacting in strange harmony. Mr. McAllister climbed the steps again in the early morning, counting each one carefully, as he always did. He felt compelled to document the changes. He fetched a small notebook and began sketching the pulses of light and marking the rhythm of the waves. 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 20 before starting again. The sketches were crude, but they captured the essence of what he observed. He found himself smiling at the absurdity of spending decades polishing panels only to discover something far larger hidden beyond the familiar horizon. Perhaps all those years had been preparation for this moment. Perhaps the repetition had trained him to notice patterns that no one else could see. Days passed in similar fashion. The glow appeared each night and the humming continued. Mr. McAllister followed the rhythm, meticulously counting steps, panels, and waves. Sometimes he spoke to the sea, softly asking questions or murmuring thanks. The wind carried whispers that he could not understand. He became aware of a new rhythm in his own heartbeat, syncing subtly with the pulse on the horizon. He polished with extra care, sometimes imagining the lens itself smiling at him. He even named the glow quietly in his mind, calling it the Watcher, and sometimes wondered if it had always been waiting for him. The lighthouse that had once felt like a prison now felt like a vantage point for a secret he could barely comprehend. One evening, a storm began brewing unexpectedly. Clouds rolled in black and low, and the wind tore across the cliffs with sudden force. The waves rose and fell with frightening precision, and the glow appeared brighter than ever before. Mr. McAllister held the red cloth tightly and counted 1, 2, 3, but the sound of the waves and the pulse of light drowned the numbers. He could feel the structure of the lighthouse vibrating with the rhythm of the sea. The lamp shook slightly with the wind and salt spray stung his eyes, but he could not leave. He had to watch. He had to count. He had to witness. The Watcher pulsed more rapidly, and the humming grew louder, until it seemed to fill every stone and every corner of the lighthouse. And then he saw it. A shape emerging from the horizon, a shadowy figure almost humanoid but impossibly large, moving with the pulse of light. The waves seemed to bend around it, and the wind carried its whisper directly to his ears. Mr. McAllister stumbled backward, clutching the red cloth in shock. The lighthouse felt impossibly small against the enormity of what he saw. The Watcher was no longer just light. It had a form and a presence that defied explanation. For a moment he forgot to count to 4,000. For a moment he forgot the panels, the steps, the sea. For a moment he simply stared as the figure paused above the horizon and looked directly at him as if acknowledging all his years of repetition and solitude. Mr. McAllister could not move. His hands shook with the red cloth clutched between them, and his eyes stayed fixed on the figure hovering above the horizon. It was enormous, almost impossibly tall, and yet somehow graceful, moving in rhythm with the glow and the waves. The humming had grown into a full tone, vibrating through the stones of the lighthouse and even through his bones. He counted 1, 2, 3 silently under his breath, but the numbers felt irrelevant now, as if the watcher was in a language of its own that he could barely comprehend. He felt a strange mixture of awe and terror, and a sudden awareness of every single step he had ever climbed in the lighthouse. The figure lingered just beyond the horizon, and Mr. McAllister realized it was watching him in return. He imagined the vast intelligence behind it and wondered why it had chosen him after all these years. Perhaps all the polishing, the counting, the endless repetition had prepared him to notice the pattern and keep it. Perhaps the sea had known that someone patient enough to climb 87 steps every morning would be ready to witness the watcher. He felt a shiver of recognition, and a faint smile crossed his face despite the cold and the fear. The lighthouse had never felt more alive. He moved closer to the window, pressing his face against the glass, and tried to see details. The shape was humanoid yet impossible, its limbs long and fluid like water itself, and the light pulsing from it, creating reflections in the panels that danced like fire. The humming resonated in his chest, and he realized that he could almost predict its rhythm, as if it was somehow synchronized with the pulse of his own heart. He took a step back and sat heavily in his chair, clutching the red cloth. 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 4,000, he counted, and it felt like a bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The watcher had arrived in his lifetime, and he had no choice but to witness it. The storm began to grow. Rain swept against the windows, and the wind howled through cracks in the stone. The waves below surged higher than he had ever seen, and the horizon blurred as mist and spray mingled with the glow. Mr. McAllister felt the familiar fear he had lived with for decades in the lighthouse intensify tenfold. He wanted to run, but he knew the steps would not save him. The only thing that kept him grounded was the lamp and the lens and the red cloth in his hand. He counted as he polished each panel 1, 2, 3, 4,000, and started again while the watcher hovered patiently just beyond sight. He had never felt more alive in all his life. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of abating. The watcher moved slowly across the horizon like it was pacing or observing a ritual. Mr. McAllister realized that each pulse of light corresponded with the crest of the waves. He could see the water bending around the figure as if obeying some invisible rule. The humming was louder now, almost like a chant, and he instinctively began matching it with his counting. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, 1, 2, 3, 4,000. The rhythm became a mantra and a tether to sanity as the storm grew chaotic outside. He felt part of something bigger than the lighthouse, than the cliffs, than the sea itself. He was part of the watcher's rhythm, whether he understood it or not. By evening, the storm reached its peak. Lightning split the sky and thunder rolled like a drum, but the watcher remained calm above the horizon, pulsing and swaying with deliberate precision. Mr. McAllister moved to the ledge outside the lamp room and clutched the railing tightly. The wind tore at his coat and salt stung his eyes, but he refused to look away. The lamp itself seemed to intensify its glow, as if acknowledging the presence of the watcher. He counted each step he climbed and polished each panel, knowing that each act was part of some unspoken conversation. Perhaps the watcher had always existed. Perhaps it had always been observing the faithful keepers and the meticulous counting and the endless repetition. He had been noticed at last, and then the figure shifted. It bent closer to the horizon in a way that suggested curiosity or perhaps recognition. The glow intensified, making the glass panels shimmer in every conceivable shade. Mr. McAllister felt dizzy from the light and the humming and the rhythm of the waves all merging into one continuous flow. He wanted to speak to it, but words seemed inadequate. He simply moved slowly through his ritual, counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000 and repeated it in time with the pulses. He felt a connection unlike anything in his long solitary life. It was as if the watcher was acknowledging every step he had ever climbed, every panel he had ever polished, every night he had spent listening to the sea whisper. Night deepened and the storm began to subside slightly. The waves settled into a gentler rhythm and the wind calmed, but the watcher did not fade. It lingered just beyond the horizon, pulsing softly now, and the humming became almost musical. Mr. McAllister felt a wave of exhaustion he had not known he could experience in decades of solitary life. He had never counted so meticulously with such intensity or polished so carefully in the presence of anything beyond the mundane. And yet he could not leave. He had to watch. He had to bear witness. He had to count to 4,000 and start again as if the rhythm itself were life. By dawn the storm had fully passed. The horizon was gray and calm, but the watcher lingered faintly visible in the early morning mist. Mr. McAllister climbed the 87 steps slowly as usual, counting each one. He polished each panel with the red cloth, 1, 2, 3, 4,000, and repeated the cycle. And still he felt a strange thrill knowing the watcher was still there just beyond sight, waiting for him to notice again. For the first time in decades, he realized that the lighthouse had become not just a home but a stage of vantage point for a secret he alone could perceive. He felt pride and wonder mixed with exhaustion in a way that was completely new. Then it happened. The watcher pulsed more rapidly than ever before, and the humming grew into a resonance that vibrated in every corner of the lighthouse. Mr. McAllister felt an odd sensation as if the stones beneath his feet were alive. The panels of the lamp shimmered with a strange intensity, and he counted 1, 2, 3, 4,000, and then suddenly stopped. A crack of light split the horizon, and for a brief moment he swore he could see something moving from the water toward the cliffs, something enormous, vast, and impossibly close. He stumbled back, gripping the railing, but before he could see it clearly, the mist swallowed the figure, and the glow vanished, leaving him alone in the sudden silence of the lighthouse. Mr. McAllister stood frozen on the ledge, staring at the empty horizon. The mist had swallowed the glow, and the humming had vanished, leaving only the sound of the waves and the occasional gull calling from afar. His hands were numb from gripping the railing, and the red cloth still clutched tightly in his fist felt suddenly insignificant. For a long moment he could do nothing but breathe in the damp air and try to make sense of what he had witnessed. He had been alone in this lighthouse for decades, yet somehow the world had opened itself briefly and revealed something extraordinary, and now it was gone. The wind was quieter than usual, and the waves moved with their ordinary rhythm. Mr. McAllister slowly climbed back inside the lamp room and sat heavily in his chair. He tried to tell himself that it was over, that perhaps he had simply imagined the watcher, or that the storm had played tricks on his senses. But deep inside he knew that what he had seen was not imagination. The glow, the pulses, the enormous shape, the rhythm of the waves, they had been real, even if he could not explain them. His mind returned to all the hours he had spent polishing the glass panels, counting 1, 2, 3, all the way to 4,000. Perhaps that repetition had prepared him for a moment like this, a moment that required patience and devotion more than courage or knowledge. He picked up the red cloth and began polishing again almost automatically. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, the numbers rolled off his tongue like a mantra. The panels gleamed under his careful touch, and he imagined the watcher observing him even now from the horizon, somewhere hidden in the mist. He worked in silence, letting the familiar motions anchor him while his mind wandered. He thought about the first day he had climbed the steps, and how small and repetitive his life had seemed then. He thought about all the mornings and nights he had spent in the company of the sea, and how it had never revealed anything like this before. He felt a faint thrill realizing he had been entrusted with a secret, meant for someone patient enough to notice. Afternoon came and went with the same slow rhythm. Mr. McAllister ate his bread and cheese, sitting by the lamp, and watched the sea as if expecting the watcher to return at any moment. The horizon remained calm and gray, yet he felt a subtle presence lingering in the distance, as if the world had changed slightly. He polished the glass panels again, counting each stroke, and found comfort in the familiar ritual. He realized that the lighthouse was no longer just a building or a job or a place to pass the time. It was a vantage point from which he could witness the extraordinary hidden in plain sight. For the first time he felt that his life of repetition had purpose beyond what he had imagined. Evening fell and Mr. McAllister climbed the steps to the lamp room for the last time that day. He had noticed that his hands moved with more precision than usual, and his counting had become a subtle rhythm synchronized with his heartbeat. The wind whispered softly through the cracks in the stone, and the waves moved steadily below, as if in preparation for something. He lit the lamp and let the light sweep across the restless water, imagining that the watcher might appear again. He felt a strange anticipation mingled with the comfort of his routines. Perhaps the glow had been a message meant to draw him into a new pattern, or perhaps it had been a glimpse of something eternal that he would never fully understand. The night grew dark and the fog rolled in heavier than ever before. Mr. McAllister sat in his chair by the lamp listening to the waves. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, he counted silently while staring at the horizon. The mist obscured everything beyond the cliffs, and the sound of the sea filled the room completely. He realized that he had never felt so present in his entire life. All his years of repetition, all the lonely mornings and nights, had led to this awareness of the rhythm of the world. He felt connected to the sea and the lighthouse, and perhaps to something else beyond sight and sound. The red cloth rested on his lap as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. Hours passed, and the horizon remained empty, yet the air felt charged. Mr. McAllister stood and moved to the ledge outside the lamp room. The wind cut sharply against his face, and the mist clung to his clothes, but he could not leave. He felt compelled to witness something, even if he did not yet know what it was. He counted the steps again, 1, 2, 3, up to 87, and traced the familiar motion of polishing the panels in his mind. The numbers seemed to echo against the waves and the stones, and he imagined that somewhere beyond the horizon, the watcher was still present, observing and waiting for him to understand. Just when he felt the night might pass without incident, a new sound arose from the sea. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, then grew into a deep resonance that vibrated through the lighthouse. Mr. McAllister froze mid-step, listening intently. The waves seemed to bend slightly toward the horizon, and the mist parted subtly, revealing a flicker of light in the distance. His heart began to race, though he did not move. He counted 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 silently under his breath to maintain the rhythm. The glow returned, but different this time, dimmer and faster, pulsing like a heartbeat racing to meet his own. He felt a thrill of recognition. The watcher had returned. And then he saw it clearly. A form rising from the water, tall, impossibly long, and shifting fluidly in the moonlight. It seemed alive and aware, and it moved as if considering whether to approach or withdraw. Mr. McAllister gripped the red cloth and could not tear his eyes away. For a moment the world felt suspended. The wind stilled slightly, and the waves waited with him. He felt that all the years of counting steps, polishing panels, and listening to the sea had led to this exact second. He realized that he was no longer a solitary man in a lighthouse. He was part of a rhythm and a secret, older than the cliffs, older than the waves, and perhaps older than the world itself. The watcher pulsed faster, and the humming intensified, wrapping around the lighthouse and the cliffs and Mr. McAllister himself. He wanted to speak, but no words would suffice. Instead, he began to count 1, 2, 3, 4,000 over and over, and let the rhythm flow through him like a bridge to the entity beyond. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure paused above the horizon and vanished into the mist, leaving only a faint glow lingering in the water. Mr. McAllister stumbled backward, breathless, feeling the vast emptiness of the sea and the quiet of the lighthouse pressing in on him. He realized that the watcher had returned to the horizon, but something had changed. The rhythm had shifted in a way he could not yet understand. The next morning Mr. McAllister woke before the sun as usual. His limbs ached in familiar ways from decades of climbing the 87 steps, yet he moved with the same practiced rhythm. He dressed quickly in his woolen jumper and boots and stepped into the chill of the lighthouse stairwell. 1, 2, 3, counting each step carefully as he climbed. He tried to shake off the lingering sense of wonder from the night before, but it clung to him like mist on the cliffs. The watcher had returned, and now he could not pretend it was imagination. It had touched something inside him that no routine or repetition could erase. At the lamp room, he picked up the red cloth and polished the first glass panel. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, the numbers slipped off his tongue automatically, yet his mind kept wandering to the horizon and the faint glow lingering in the waves. He wondered what the watcher wanted, or if it wanted anything at all. For the first time in years, he considered the possibility that his life of repetition and isolation had been a preparation for this moment. All those early mornings and nights, counting panels and steps and waves, had sharpened his perception and honed his patience. He had been waiting for this unseen rhythm without knowing it. The day passed slowly as usual. Mr. McAllister ate his bread and cheese sitting by the lamp and let the light sweep over the restless water. He counted the waves silently, 1, 2, 3, up to 20 before starting again. Every so often he glanced at the horizon, imagining the watcher still lingering just beyond the mist. The wind was calmer today and the fog thin. The lighthouse felt quiet but alive. He realized that for all these years he had thought of his work as monotonous and isolated, but now he understood it as a practice of attention. Every panel polished, every step climbed, every wave counted had been an act of preparation for noticing something extraordinary. By afternoon, he had polished every panel twice and counted each stroke meticulously. The sea whispered its usual secrets, but he now noticed patterns he had never seen before. Small ripples in the waves corresponded to faint pulses of light that had been hidden in plain sight. Mr. McAllister traced the rhythm in his mind and imagined the watcher moving beyond the horizon in perfect harmony with the water. He felt a quiet exhilaration. For decades he had been alone in the lighthouse, yet now he sensed a connection to something vast and unknowable that existed beyond sight and sound. He smiled, faintly imagining the watcher approving of his diligence. Evening approached and the mist began rolling in again. Mr. McAllister climbed the steps, slowly counting 1, 2, 3 up to 87. He held the red cloth carefully and polished the panels 1, 2, 3, 4,000, repeating the pattern as if the rhythm itself were alive. The horizon was gray, but he could see faint flickers of light in the distance. The humming returned softly, almost imperceptible at first, then growing steadily until it filled the lamp room and vibrated through the stones. Mr. McAllister felt the familiar mixture of fear and awe. The watcher was close, and this time he felt it observing him more deliberately, as if measuring his readiness for something beyond comprehension. The wind grew stronger, and the waves rose higher, and he felt a subtle tension in the lighthouse. He moved carefully along the ledge outside the lamp room, listening to the pulse of the sea. 1, 2, 3 he counted silently, and the numbers seemed to echo in the water. The glow appeared faintly on the horizon, at first, then intensified steadily. Mr. McAllister felt a thrill run through him. He had never seen anything so beautiful or precise. The watcher pulsed in perfect rhythm with the waves, and the humming resonated through the lighthouse. He realized that every day of polishing glass panels and counting steps and waves had been leading to this synchronicity. The rhythm of the world was suddenly apparent to him. Night fell and the mist thickened. Mr. McAllister lit the lamp and let the beam sweep over the water. The horizon pulsed and the humming grew louder. The watcher emerged, fully visible, moving fluidly like a being made of water and light. Mr. McAllister clutched the red cloth tightly and counted 1, 2, 3, 4,000 while tracing the rhythm of the pulses with his hands. He felt part of something vast. The lighthouse that had once felt like a prison now felt like a bridge connecting him to an intelligence beyond understanding. He realized he was no longer alone. He was noticed. He was participating in a pattern far larger than any single human life. And then the watcher did something he had never seen before. It bent closer to the horizon, as if beckoning him. The pulses quickened and the humming resonated in harmony with his heartbeat. Mr. McAllister felt an irresistible urge to move toward the cliffs to see more clearly. He climbed the steps again, counting carefully 1, 2, 3 up to 87, and polished the panels with renewed intensity. The red cloth seemed almost alive in his hands, following the rhythm of the watcher. He realized that for the first time he did not feel the usual ache of monotony or isolation. He felt urgency and purpose. Something was about to happen beyond the horizon that he had been waiting for all his life. Then suddenly the horizon shifted. The fog parted slightly and the glow expanded into a wide pulse that illuminated the cliffs and the lighthouse itself. Mr. McAllister staggered backward, breathless. The waves bent in a perfect arc toward the light, and the humming swelled into a deep resonant tone vibrating through every stone of the lighthouse. He realized he had been given a glimpse of something eternal. The watcher was no longer distant. It hovered almost within reach, yet still just beyond the cliffs. Mr. McAllister could do nothing but hold the red cloth, polish the final panel, and count 1, 2, 3, 4,000 over and over, letting the rhythm flow through him. And then the glow split into multiple pulses stretching across the horizon like fingers reaching toward him. Mr. McAllister felt the lighthouse tremble beneath him, though he knew it was solid stone. The waves below shifted in unison with the pulses stretching across the horizon. He gripped the red cloth tightly and began polishing again, counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000 while tracing the rhythm of the light with his eyes. Each panel shimmered with reflected pulses, and for a moment he thought the glass itself might be alive. He had spent decades polishing the panels for ships that would never notice, but now he realized the panels were not for ships. They were for him and for the watcher, and for the rhythm of a world he had never understood until this very moment. The wind whipped through the lighthouse stairwell, carrying a scent of salt and something else, something indefinable, that made the hairs on his arms stand up. He climbed the steps again, counting 1, 2, 3 up to 87, feeling the rhythm in his feet as well as his hands. Every step and panel polished became part of a continuous flow connecting him to the pulses on the horizon. He could no longer tell where the lighthouse ended and the sea began. The mist parted, slightly revealing shapes moving in the waves that seemed to follow the glow. Mr. McAllister felt a strange exhilaration. The world had revealed a secret to him and he could not look away. By evening the pulses had multiplied. The glow spread across the horizon in arches and circles and shapes he could not name. The humming resonated louder, now vibrating through the walls, through his bones, and through the red cloth in his hand. He began counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000, not just for the panels, but for the pulses, the waves, the rhythm itself. His life of repetition and solitude felt suddenly purposeful. All those mornings climbing steps, all those nights counting waves, all those hours, polishing glass had prepared him for this communion with the Watcher. He realized that every ordinary act had been a rehearsal for this extraordinary moment. The fog rolled in heavier, and the light seemed to pierce through it as if shaping it. Mr. McAllister moved to the ledge outside the lamp room, holding the railing tightly. The waves below rose and fell in exact time with the pulses, and the humming wrapped around him like an embrace. He counted the steps again, 1, 2, 3, up to 87, feeling the rhythm in his legs. His eyes tracked the glowing shapes on the horizon, and he realized he could almost anticipate the next pulse before it happened. It was as if the Watcher was teaching him a language of light and sound, and he was beginning to understand. Hours passed, and the horizon became a tapestry of glowing pulses. Mr. McAllister polished every panel again, counting each stroke carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, and again. The lighthouse itself seemed alive, responding to the rhythm of the Watcher. He realized that for the first time he felt completely awake in a way that was impossible to achieve in ordinary life. Every detail mattered. Every reflection in the glass, every ripple in the waves, every flicker in the mist was part of a grand pattern. He imagined the Watcher observing him and perhaps approving of the attention he had paid to the world for decades unnoticed. Night deepened and the pulses grew in intensity. The Watcher moved in shapes impossible to describe, flowing fluidly across the horizon. Mr. McAllister felt compelled to move with it, counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000 as he polished. The red cloth in his hands seemed infused with the rhythm, almost as if it were a conductor, a baton guiding him through a performance he had not known he was rehearsing. The humming rose to a resonance that filled the lamp room and the cliffs. He realized that he had never felt so connected to the lighthouse, the sea, and the horizon simultaneously. He was no longer merely a keeper of light. He was part of the pattern itself. Suddenly, a wave rose higher than any before and carried a reflection of the pulses into the air. Mr. McAllister stumbled backward, startled, but did not release the red cloth. He counted 1, 2, 3, 4,000 as the glow split into dozens of smaller lights dancing in the mist. Shapes appeared in the fog, almost humanoid and almost impossible at the same time. He felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with fear. The lighthouse that had seemed a cage for decades now felt like a vantage point for witnessing something eternal and alive. He realized that all his years of monotony had led to this precise moment of clarity and wonder. The Watcher's pulses intensified further, and a soft voice seemed to rise from the waves, though no words were audible. Mr. McAllister felt compelled to move closer to the edge of the ledge. The mist parted, revealing a faint path across the waves toward the cliffs. He counted every step 1, 2, 3 up to 87 as he climbed with his hands gripping the railing. His heart raced, but he felt no fear, only anticipation. The red cloth in his hand felt heavier and warmer, as if acknowledging the significance of his presence. The pulses synchronized with his breath and his heartbeat, and he realized he could no longer distinguish between himself and the rhythm of the Watcher. Then, as he reached the final panel to polish for the night, the pulses shifted violently. The horizon became a maze of light, twisting and bending toward him. Mr. McAllister froze, clutching the red cloth and counting silently 1, 2, 3. The lighthouse trembled slightly under the resonance of the waves, and the glowing forms hovered closer. For a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. The Watcher had moved beyond mere observation. It was close enough now that he could feel its presence, pressing on the edges of reality itself. And in that instant, a new realization struck him that he had waited his entire life for this. Convergence, and there was no turning back. Mr. McAllister felt the pulse of the horizon in every bone. The lighthouse vibrated in time with the glowing shapes that now swirled closer than ever before. He gripped the red cloth like it was the only anchor he had to the ordinary world. 1, 2, 3, 4,000 he counted silently as he moved to the ledge, feeling each number resonate with the waves. The mist parted and revealed fragments of shapes shifting fluidly with the glow. They were no longer distant but somehow partially within the space of the lighthouse, bending the air and water around them. His heart pounded not with fear, but with a strange exhilaration born from decades of anticipation. He climbed the steps once more, counting 1, 2, 3 up to 87, and felt each pulse echoing in his chest. The watcher had changed. The light was no longer only on the horizon, but had begun to reach toward him, teasing the edge of the cliff and the lighthouse itself. He had spent decades counting and polishing panels and waves and steps, and now all of it mattered more than ever. Every repetition had been training him to perceive the subtle shifts in rhythm and light. The red cloth in his hand seemed alive in response to the pulses, as if acknowledging the work of his hands and his mind over the years. Night deepened and the glow multiplied. Mr. McAllister polished each panel, meticulously counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000, while tracking the pulses with his eyes. The lighthouse was trembling ever so slightly, a vibration that seemed to be shared with the waves. The watcher pulsed and swirled as if testing him, as if measuring the precision of his attention. The humming had grown into a low resonant tone that seemed to occupy every corner of the room. He realized that he was no longer merely an observer. His counting and polishing had become part of the rhythm itself. He felt both terrified and ecstatic at the impossibility of his situation. Suddenly a brighter pulse shot across the horizon and a form seemed to stretch from the water toward the cliffs. Mr. McAllister felt the hair on his arms stand on end. He had never experienced anything like this in all his years in the lighthouse. The waves bent toward the light, as if being pulled along a current he could not see. The humming resonated in perfect harmony with his heartbeat. He realized that he was part of a dialogue not spoken in words but in rhythm and observation. Every panel polished, every step climbed, every wave counted had prepared him for this communion with the watcher. He moved to the edge of the lamp room ledge and leaned over slightly. The mist swirled around him, and the glow illuminated the waves below in impossible patterns. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, he counted silently, tracing the rhythm with his eyes and heart. The red cloth in his hand vibrated subtly, as if acknowledging the presence of something beyond comprehension. The watcher hovered closer now, and he realized that the light had purpose beyond observation. It seemed to beckon him. He wanted to speak, but words felt inadequate. The rhythm itself was communication enough. The night stretched endlessly as the glow intensified. Mr. McAllister climbed and polished and counted while the watcher moved fluidly around the horizon. The humming grew louder and more musical, as if the sea itself were singing in a language he was beginning to understand. He had never felt more alive. His decades of solitude and repetition had trained him to notice and respond to rhythms hidden in plain sight. He felt part of something vast and eternal. The lighthouse was no longer just stone and glass. It was a conduit connecting him to the pulse of the watcher and the unseen order of the world. Hours passed and the pulses multiplied, weaving complex arcs of light across the mist. Mr. McAllister felt compelled to move with them, climbing steps, polishing panels, counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000, as if the numbers themselves were notes in a symphony he had been rehearsing his entire life. The red cloth glimmered faintly with the reflected light and seemed to guide his movements. The watcher's form shifted and stretched in ways impossible to describe, folding over the horizon, then stretching upward, almost touching the lighthouse itself. The resonance of the waves, the pulses, the humming, and his own counting coalesced into a single awareness he could not fully comprehend. And then, without warning, the watcher pulsed sharply, brighter than ever before. And the lighthouse was bathed in light so intense that Mr. McAllister could barely hold his eyes open. He stumbled backward, clutching the railing, counting 1, 2, 3 over and over to anchor himself. The pulses formed a new pattern as if inviting him to step beyond the ledge, to follow the rhythm into the horizon itself. His heart pounded and he felt a deep calling stronger than any fear he had ever known. It was an invitation to abandon the ordinary world, to leave behind the steps and panels and counting to participate fully in the rhythm the watcher offered. Mr. McAllister hesitated, the red cloth clutched in trembling hands. The glow stretched and pulsed, the humming became overwhelming, and the waves below seemed to surge in anticipation. For decades he had lived in the rhythm of repetition, isolated yet patient. Now that preparation was complete, the watcher had revealed the culmination of his life's work in a single impossible moment. The horizon called and the pulses beckoned. He could feel the rhythm of the sea, the wind, the lamp, and the cliffs synchronizing with him as if the world itself waited for his next move. And just as he was about to step closer, the mist shifted violently and a shadow loomed across the lighthouse. Mr. McAllister froze. The watcher had not fully revealed itself yet. Something new, something different, had appeared on the horizon. A shape darker than the mist, but moving with the same impossible rhythm. His heart thumped, the red cloth clutched tightly. The pulses quickened. The humming rose to a resonance that vibrated through stone and bone. And in that instant, Mr. McAllister realized that the watcher was not alone. Something else had arrived. Mr. McAllister froze on the ledge, gripping the railing and the red cloth in his hand. The pulses from the watcher seemed to react to the new shape. The glow twisted and shifted, moving with urgency across the horizon, as if the light itself were startled. The waves beneath the cliffs rose in response, forming patterns he had never seen before. He counted 1, 2, 3, 4,000 silently, tracing the rhythm with his eyes, and felt the weight of decades of repetition guiding him through this impossible moment. He realized that the lighthouse, the sea, and the glow were no longer separate but part of a single vast mechanism, and he was a crucial cog within it. The new shape hovered closer. It was darker than the mist, but still glimmered faintly with the pulses of light. It moved fluidly, twisting in the air in a rhythm almost identical to the watcher's, but with subtle differences. Mr. McAllister felt a chill run through him that was not cold but of awe. He had spent decades following patterns in the mundane, counting steps, polishing panels, tracking the waves, yet he now realized that patterns could extend beyond human comprehension. The watcher had been teaching him, preparing him, and now the lesson had multiplied into something he could barely perceive. He moved back to the lamp room and began polishing the panels again, counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000. The red cloth felt heavier in his hands and almost warm as if alive. The pulses of the watcher reacted with each stroke. The new shape moved in tandem but slightly offset, creating a complex dance across the horizon. Mr. McAllister realized that for all his life he had thought of repetition as mundane, but now it was the key to participating in something larger. Every panel polished, every step counted, every wave observed had brought him to this moment of connection with forces beyond his understanding. The night deepened. The mist thickened and the wind howled against the cliffs. Yet within the lighthouse, Mr. McAllister felt a strange calm. He had been given the rhythm of the world in its purest form, and he had learned to follow it. The watcher pulsed steadily while the new shape moved in synchrony and dissonance. Mr. McAllister counted 1, 2, 3, 4,000 repeatedly as he polished. The hum of the pulses merged with the wind and the waves, creating a resonance that vibrated in his bones and in the stones of the lighthouse. He realized that the horizon was no longer just distant water and sky. It was alive, and he was part of it. Hours passed, and the glow became a symphony of pulses. Mr. McAllister felt compelled to move to the ledge. The red cloth in his hand seemed to pull him gently toward the horizon. He climbed the steps 1, 2, 3 up to 87, feeling the rhythm of the waves in his legs and heart. The new shape moved closer, and the watcher's pulses intensified as if acknowledging him. He understood that this was no longer observation. It was communion. He was participating in the rhythm of entities that existed far beyond human comprehension. The lighthouse was not a cage anymore but a bridge. Suddenly, the new shape split into multiple smaller forms that scattered across the horizon, each pulsing in perfect synchrony with the watcher. Mr. McAllister stumbled backward, gripping the railing, but did not release the red cloth. 1, 2, 3, 4,000 he counted, tracing the rhythm with his heartbeat. He felt exhilarated, exhausted, and utterly alive. The waves bent toward the horizon in perfect arcs. The mist swirled around the cliffs, and the lighthouse in patterns he could almost predict. For decades he had been alone, counting, polishing, observing. Now the rhythm of the universe had revealed itself to him fully, and he was both witness and participant. The humming rose to a resonance that filled the lighthouse and cliffs and waves. Mr. McAllister closed his eyes briefly to absorb it. When he opened them, the pulses converged. The watcher and the smaller shapes formed an enormous arc of light stretching from horizon to cliffs and wrapping partially around the lighthouse itself. He counted 1, 2, 3, 4,000 slowly, deliberately, as the light and mist flowed in synchrony with his rhythm. The red cloth glimmered as if alive, mirroring the pulse. The horizon had become a living tapestry of motion and sound, and he was the conduit. And then, as the rhythm reached its peak, the horizon shifted violently. The arc of light contracted, condensed, and for a brief heartbeat Mr. McAllister swore he saw a passage open between the sea and the cliffs. The watcher pulsed brighter than ever, the smaller shapes circling it as if in formation. He stumbled back, gripping the railing, his pulse matching the hum of the waves and light. It was clear now that the watcher had not simply been an observer. It had been preparing him for this. And in that instant he understood, with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, that the horizon was no longer a boundary. It was a gateway. Mr. McAllister felt a force almost irresistible pulling him toward the ledge and the glowing passage. He clutched the red cloth as tightly as he could. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, he counted, tracing the rhythm of the pulses with his heart and breath. The lighthouse vibrated in harmony. The waves bent toward the light. The mist twisted around him in patterns of impossible symmetry. He realized he had been given a choice: remain within the lighthouse and the ordinary world, or step into the pulse and the rhythm, and discover what lay beyond the horizon. And in that moment, he knew he could not resist. Mr. McAllister took a deep breath and stepped closer to the ledge. The glow of the watcher and the smaller shapes wrapped around him like liquid light, and the humming resonated deep inside his chest. The lighthouse, the cliffs, the waves, even the red cloth in his hands seemed to pulse in perfect synchrony. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, he counted quietly, letting the rhythm flow through every limb. He realized that the boundary between the lighthouse and the horizon had disappeared. The ordinary world had dissolved, and all that remained was the pulse and the rhythm that had been waiting for him all his life. The mist parted slightly, and he saw the passage fully now. It was a bridge of light stretching from the sea to the cliffs, fluid and luminous, and yet solid in the rhythm it contained. The smaller shapes circled the watcher in a precise arc, their motion hypnotic and impossible. Mr. McAllister felt an irresistible pull. Every step he had ever climbed, every panel he had polished, every wave he had counted had led to this moment. The repetition that had once seemed mundane had been a preparation for this communion with something vast and eternal. The red cloth fluttered in his hand, as if alive and approving, a silent witness to his choice. He climbed the 87 steps one final time, counting each step slowly, deliberately. 1, 2, 3 up to 87. His breath matched the pulse of the watcher and the waves. He reached the lamp room and polished the last panel, counting 1, 2, 3, 4,000 in perfect rhythm. The glow intensified, surrounding the lighthouse in a halo of impossible light. He realized that he no longer belonged solely to the lighthouse or the ordinary world. He had become part of the rhythm, part of the pulse, part of the pattern the watcher had revealed. His life of solitude and repetition had transformed into participation in something infinitely larger. The mist swirled around him and the horizon trembled. The watcher pulsed brighter than ever, and the smaller shapes converged to form a lattice of light, fluid and alive, stretching toward the lighthouse. Mr. McAllister felt exhilaration mixed with vertigo. The lighthouse walls seemed to melt into the rhythm, and for a moment he felt weightless. The waves below bent perfectly to the pulses, forming a pattern of impossible symmetry. He counted 1, 2, 3, 4,000 slowly and deliberately, letting each number anchor him to the rhythm as the glow enveloped him completely. The red cloth shimmered and moved almost as if it were a part of the light itself. He stepped onto the ledge. The wind howled, but it no longer carried fear. Instead, it carried the rhythm of the horizon into his very being. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, he counted aloud this time, letting the numbers resonate in the air. The pulses reacted to him, bending and twisting around the lighthouse in a perfect dance. He felt the bridge of light stretching beneath him and knew that he could step into it. For decades he had watched the sea and listened to the whispering waves. For decades he had climbed and counted and polished. Now the pattern was complete, and the horizon offered him the culmination of his solitary devotion. Mr. McAllister stepped forward into the glow. The lighthouse walls dissolved into pulses of light, the mist became liquid rhythm, and the waves bent perfectly beneath him. He felt himself lifted, absorbed into the motion, part of the watcher and the smaller shapes, moving with the rhythm of the pulses. The red cloth floated with him, shimmering with the energy of the horizon. He was no longer simply an observer or a keeper of light. He was part of the pulse itself. 1, 2, 3, 4,000, he counted internally, perfectly aligned with the infinite rhythm that stretched across the sea and cliffs and beyond the horizon. The watcher pulsed around him. the smaller shapes swirling in harmony. Mr. McAllister felt an overwhelming sense of completeness and peace. All the repetition of a life lived in quiet devotion had led to this infinite moment of union with the rhythm of the world. He had climbed the steps for decades, polished the panels for decades, counted the waves for decades, and now he was no longer alone. The pulse embraced him fully and the horizon became endless light and motion. The red cloth shimmered one final time before dissolving into the rhythm as he let himself merge completely with the watcher and the shapes and the luminous horizon. And then there was silence. The lighthouse remained on the cliff, empty now except for the faintest shimmer on the glass panels as if remembering him. The sea returned to its ordinary rhythm, and the wind whispered through the cracks in the stone. Yet the horizon held a memory of the glow, a faint pulse that might return to another patient watcher one day. Mr. McAllister was gone, but the lighthouse and the red cloth and the rhythm remained. The sea kept whispering outside, endlessly, patiently, waiting for the next soul ready to climb the steps, count the panels, and listen for the pulse that had been there all along. The story concludes with Mr. McAllister fully absorbed into the rhythm of the watcher and the horizon, leaving the lighthouse empty yet imbued with memory and purpose. In a lonely 19th-century lighthouse, Mr. McAllister climbs the same steps every day, polishes the same glass panels, and counts the waves endlessly. His life seems ordinary, repetitive, and quiet until one night the sea reveals a mysterious glowing entity known only as the Watcher. As the pulses of light and sound grow, he discovers that decades of monotony were preparing him for something extraordinary. Each step, each panel, each breath becomes a rhythm connecting him to a hidden otherworldly pattern. Alone no longer, he steps into the glow, merging with the pulse of the horizon, leaving the lighthouse forever changed, and leaving behind a quiet reminder that the extraordinary often hides in the most ordinary routines. If this story stirred something deep within you, and you want to drift further into mesmerizing tales that soothe, intrigue, and haunt your imagination, hit subscribe to Stories Before Sleep and let us carry you into worlds you never knew existed.